Welcome to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. In each and every show, we share the latest about regulations and things you need to know. Plus upcoming conferences and festivals, along with interviews with movers and shakers in the fabulous vape space. With your host, Norm Bauer. Hey, Norm.
Paul, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, and everyone out there that's listening in Vape Land, welcome. This is show number 1 for Vape News Radio, and thanks for joining us. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up and what we're all about, it's really all about education, informing you about this, what we consider the very exciting vape space. Also, the very volatile, the very highly contentious, highly controversial vape space. We're going to be sharing a lot of things, including what's new with the FDA in Washington, state regulations, local regulations. But before we get into that, let me kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what this show is really all about. Though, for those of you who do not read Vape News Magazine, please make sure you get a hold of us after the show. Send us a note to Norm at VapeMentors, VapeMentors.com, and I'll make sure that we get you connected with our publisher, Matt, over in St. Louis, Missouri. And Vape News Magazine is really the number 1 trade publication in the vape space. We keep people informed about not just what's going on in the more boring world, but also what's going on as far as all the new mods that are coming out and all the new festivals that are coming out and all the new wonderful juices that are going to be always reviewed. And so the whole idea is to basically keep you in touch. A little bit about me, because some of you who are listening might know who I am, and some of you, of course, might not. My name is Norm Bauer, and I have been a consultant with a host of different businesses over the last several years. And really how I got into the vape space, like a lot of people, was kind of by accident, like it is for a lot of us. And I saw that there was a huge need for education, because so many people in this industry, and you're probably one of them, are millennials who may be getting involved with a business for the very first time. But let me tell you, the marketplace is very, very quickly changing. We have a lot of people who are looking very closely at what we're doing, and there's a lot of changes that are going on. So let's get started. Last week, I went to a pretty trippy place. I went to Las Vegas, and it wasn't trippy because it was Las Vegas. I was trippy because of the National Association of Tobacco Outlets trade show. So understand, this organization has been around for about 13 years. This is the 4th year that they've had a convention, and this is primarily geared towards those in the tobacco world. All of the big tobacco people were there: R.J. Reynolds, Altria, Lorillard. A lot of people in the new e-cig market were there, including Enjoy and RJ Vapors, which has been spun off, which will be interviewing someone from RJ Vapors during one of our future shows. But what was really fascinating is you had a lot of your major players. You also had a big, big influence of people who were involved in things like cigars and things like hookah and things like all kinds of mods, all kinds of juices, all kinds of everything. So it was pretty much across the board. So here's the gut impression that I got when I got there. This is a 2-day event. It's primarily for, I guess you would consider, old schoolers, because let's face it, the tobacco industry has been around for, quite some time, for several decades as a full-blown business. And for anyone who maybe grew up when cigarette ads were still on television and in the newspapers and in the magazines, you know how controversial cigarettes have come since the 60s and since the 70s. So the tobacco industry is not exactly looked at in high esteem from the standpoint that obviously the number of smokers is down considerably from what it was before. Once upon a time, in the heyday, back during the 50s and 60s, we had over half the population of the United States smoking cigarettes. Now we're down by a substantial amount. Certain parts of the country are still very heavy in the smoking world, including the tobacco states like Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina, and down through the southeastern part of the United States, Georgia, Texas, Missouri, Alabama. Those are all fairly heavy in the smoking world. But where I am located in California, specifically Southern California and Orange County, tobacco is not looked on favorably. And as a byproduct, vaping and e-cigs are not necessarily looked on favorably either. It's caused a massive confusion, a massive controversy, and these are things that I'm going to be discussing not only during this show, but as an ongoing battle. Because, guys, this is a battle. This is a battle, absolutely. You know, we have a lot of people in regulators and the legislation, and they are basically following a very, very bad precedent. So I'm going to get into that in just a moment, but let me talk about the gorilla in the room. The FDA. FDA, of course, is the Federal Drug Administration. So they are very, very strict when it comes to what you put into your body. Isn't that nice of them, guys? It's really awesome. So they control the quality of what goes into our bodies, certainly from a pharmaceutical standpoint, also from an alcohol standpoint, and also from a tobacco standpoint. So as it stands right now, there are very definite guidelines, very definite criteria about what those in the tobacco industry can and cannot do. For instance, you cannot advertise on television, you cannot advertise in magazines, you cannot advertise in all those mediums that you used to be able to do, because that all was pretty much eliminated back in 1972. January 1st, 1972 is when the law passed. And so the FDA, for decades, really didn't have a whole lot to do in the tobacco space other than just make sure that their laws and the rules and the regulations got adhered to. So everything goes fine during the 80s, during the 90s, the early 2000s, and suddenly, from China comes e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes came around about the early part of the early 2000s. Started by a scientist over in China, although they have been dabbling in this industry actually since the 60s, but it never really took hold. It never really did anything of any great significance. So here we are in the year 2000s, and now you have this brand new thingamajig called an e-cigarette or an electronic cigarette. And initially there was no regulation. And, of course, as more and more people started gravitating out of the combustible cigarettes into the electronic cigarettes, now it brings up the question, where does the FDA fit into this? And, unfortunately, they do fit into this. And there's more questions than answers, but I'm going to give you some direction based on what I learned last week at the NATO event, at the National Association of Tobacco Outlets. And what I learned is that the FDA has a 9-step process. From the time someone gets a bug to institute some type of regulation or law, they have to go through 9 steps before it actually becomes legislated and signed in as a workable law. Right now, as we speak, in April of 2014, we're at step number 4. So the bottom line, guys, is that the FDA was supposed to come out with some rules and regs last fall. The date that kept getting bandied around was October of 2013. The FDA was finally going to come out with their brand new rules and regulations, and obviously that just never happened. And so the opinion is that everything was going to start coming down this year in 2014, and we still haven't heard anything. So here's pretty much the conclusion. Here's pretty much the consensus of the people at the event. It's highly unlikely that you will see anything come down in this year 2014. So what does that mean? Well, right now there's a big movement towards the juicing being manufactured in clean rooms, and certainly being manufactured within the United States and not being brought in from overseas. This right now is going to be a self-regulated market. So if you own a juice store, if you own a vape store, if you are developing an online store, it's in your best interest to stick with U.S.-made products. Try to get it as clean as you possibly can, something that's made in a clean room, mainly because if, God forbid, something happens and someone gets sick on some bad juice, bad product, that's going to cause a major, major problem. So long story short, the FDA is in process, but don't hold your breath. They are going to be doing some things, but not for a while yet. So let's talk about big tobacco. You know, in this world we have big this, big that. We have big oil, big finance, and we also have big tobacco, which is primarily comprised of the larger tobacco companies like Lorillard, Altria, R.J. Reynolds, Brown and Williamson. And so these are all considered the movers and the shakers in the tobacco world. So their life was pretty good for a long time because they really didn't have anything new to have to worry about. There was really not much competition in their world. But now comes this thing called e-cigs. And it took them a while before realizing that they were losing market share. Well, make no mistake, they are definitely paying attention now, and they are getting into the e-cig market in a big way. R.J. Reynolds spun off into a brand new entity called R.J. Vapors. I was lucky enough to speak with the president of that new organization, Stephanie, and she's going to be on during a future show. And Altria and Lorillard are involved. The number one leader in the e-cig market is Blue, B-L-U. You're going to see them get larger and larger market share. And there's also going to be some potential mergers coming up simply because of the fact that these folks are going to be able to do more together than apart. So the question always comes up is big tobacco our friend? Is big tobacco our enemy? And I'm just going to leave you with this thought. Big tobacco is our friend. They are actually very beneficial to the vaping space. They are actually very beneficial to the e-cigarette space because they have influence, they have money, they have power, they have lobbyists, they have all the things going for us that the people in the quote-unquote entrepreneurial vaping world really do not. Another entity that I really want to share with you is the advocacy group, actually two of them. One of them is called CASAA, C-A-S-A-A, which stands for the Consumer Advocates for Smoke-Free Alternatives. I'm a huge fan of CASAA. I've been an advocate for them since last summer of 2013. And if you've never been to their website, go to CASAA.org and sign up for it. It's free. And what these folks do is they basically are watchdogs. They keep an eye on all the things that are going on at certainly a federal level, but also at a state level, and more importantly, at the local level. So you're starting to see a lot more resistance, a lot more activities at City Hall in the local markets than you do in the state markets and certainly at the federal level right now. And another organization is SFATA, S-F-A-T-A, which I had to stumble over that acronym out there in Las Vegas, but they're a great organization, and they're more of a trade group that protects the industry itself. And I was fortunate enough to interview Cynthia Cabrera, who's the executive director of SFATA, which stands for the Smoke-Free Alternatives Trade Association. And when we come back after the break, I'm going to tell you about a couple of events that are going to be coming up. Because again, part one of this radio show is going to be really about what's going on with what I call the top big movers and shakers: the FDA, Big Tobacco, CASAA, and SFATA. Another person that you definitely should try to get up and find out what she's doing is a woman with Wells Fargo Financial. Her name is Bonnie Herzog. And Bonnie primarily takes care of the tobacco space, the convenience store space, the alcohol space, and she has been extraordinarily helpful and insightful about bringing me and several 100,000 other people up to speed about what's happening from the financial aspects of it and also in the vaping space. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about some of the upcoming conventions coming up. There's Vapor World in Chicago. SFATA's having another event in Chicago as well. We've got something coming up in Germany for those of you who are over in Europe. We've also got one coming up in Florida. I believe it's Tampa, and we're going to be talking about that in just a few moments. We also have events coming up in Reno, in Tucson, and in Oklahoma. We have an event called Rocklahoma, which is a quasi-rock concert with a little bit of infusion of the vaping space. So I want to remind you, the show today is sponsored by Blow Emporiums and Blow Gourmet E-Juice. Are you looking to open your own shop with a turnkey package? Do you want to develop your own line of juice? Give me a call at 949-495-6162 or shoot me an email to norm@vapementors.com. We also want to thank another one of our sponsors, which is vapors.com, and I'm going to share a little bit more about them in a few moments. And these guys really have it together. They are looking to be the Amazon of the hardware and mod industry, and you're going to be hearing more about them as time goes on. So we're going to go take a little break, and we're going to come back for part two. Welcome to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. This is Norm Bauer. Don't go away. Be right back.
You're listening to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. with the one and only Vape Mentor, Norm Bauer.